All right. Well, welcome back to this situation again. Um, I did enjoy this last time we did it, and so I'm looking forward to it this time. Very busy time of year at UPS. I apologize for how I'm dressed, but it is cold tonight in the church. And so let's go ahead and right into prayer. Lord, we praise you that you've given us so many incredible blessings, that you watch over us, that you are active in the world, that you love through both loving kindness and through discipline. We ask, Lord, that we could show the world in the ways in which you've loved us. And Father, ask for peace in this tumultuous time, and ask that you watch over our efforts and safeguard us as we go to share the gospel with those in great need. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. We are in Acts chapter 10, and we got a lot of passages to read because this is one narrative that really needs to be understood together. So I may be talking very fast because time is short with a recording like this. And I have to fit a lot in. So this is Acts 10, starting in verse 1. We're going to go all the way to 29. I'm not going to read it all in one thing because there's no way that anyone can keep up with that. It'd be very difficult. So what I'm going to do is kind of break it up. I'm going to talk a little bit and break it up and talk a little bit. And I really, honestly, if time permitted, would have gone all the way down maybe to the end of the chapter because it really kind of punctuates everything that happens before it. But there just isn't time. So I'll try to do a quick recap next week. And hopefully I'll be able to kind of get you back up to speed and really finish it off. But if you could read the rest of this chapter on your own, it'd be worth your time, because that is it really makes the point of the whole thing. And again, time permitting, I would do it, but there's just so much that could be said, and I couldn't pass up on mining some of this. The first thing you have to understand when approaching the Bible is we live in a material world. But it is founded on spiritual truth. The truth is found in spirit. And if one does not approach the Bible with a spiritual worldview, the teachings, as important as they are difficult. Now, that doesn't mean you can't teach a person out of the Bible spiritual things. In fact, when you study the Bible, I had a big debate on YouTube with someone about this. And the point I was trying to make is it fascinates me how atheists are so, or maybe secularists generally, are so off in their interpretations of the Bible when they have the full capacity to interpret it correctly. There should be no reason why any intelligent human being, atheist or otherwise, couldn't interpret correctly what the Bible teaches. That's not a problem. The question that you learn, and I think that it's true if you take courses in hermeneutics and interpretation and all that, what you learn is that what's difficult is to get an atheist or an unbeliever, I should say, to find these passages to be significant. That requires the work of the Holy Spirit. You can't do it, and I can't do it with persuasive arguments. We can try to flower up the language, whatever we want to do. It won't matter. We need God to step in and do that. And I think that he does. I think these are very powerful passages that anyone seeking to find God will absolutely find him in them. But it just amazed me. It was, in fact, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that his interpretations were so poor. And I just couldn't believe it. Now, it might be a little bit of what you call a halo effect, which is if somebody's really good at one thing, you assume they're good at everything. And he's no expert on the Bible. So let's give him, benefit of the doubt on something like that. But primarily what the issue was that he just does not believe that this is a spiritual world. And it was affecting his interpretation. Now, again, I don't believe it has to be that way. But sometimes people want the Bible to say what they want it to say so they can criticize it. The fact of the matter is, I hope that you have a spiritual view of the world. And I'm going to ask a question later in this that's going to kind of challenge that a little bit. And so I hope you will think about that. I was met a guy at work, and I think I told a little bit of this story last time I did this on video, so I'm going to shorten it and catch you up to speed. But he said that he was a seer of visions. He was sent visions, and that these visions came true. And I said, where do you think these visions come from? And he didn't really have an answer. And I said, I'm concerned for you. I said, because I believe things like this lead to bad places. I don't believe these are necessarily good spirits that are giving you these visions. He said spirits did talk to him, that he didn't talk to them, but they talked to him. And I said, okay. I said, and he came from a family where this happened. And I said, I think that that's concerning. And a couple of months after that, a girl came up to me and she said, she was talking about him, and she said, that guy's strange. And I said, yeah, he's strange, but in a good way, intelligent, smart guy who's curious and interesting. And she said, no, she said, he did something really weird. And I said, what did he do? And she said, well, I pray sometimes. I pray, and I think of my grandmother, and I pray. And me and my grandmother used to do this thing together, and I end my prayers by doing this thing. I don't remember what it was. And she said, he came up to me, did that thing, and said, your grandmother's watching over you. Let that sink in for a minute. Now, myself, when he told me he has visions, didn't doubt it for a second. I also don't doubt where the source of those visions are, because I think the Bible tells me. And when she told me this, I wasn't surprised one bit. I had a chance to talk to him again recently, this week, in fact. And it's just amazing when you preach through the Bible and teach the Bible a lot, how it just coordinates with things in your life. And him and I were talking. He said, I was going in to help him do a job. And he said, I'm glad you're in here. He said, I really want to talk to you. And he said, I'm getting a vision of this woman. And she's asking, he was very specific. And she's asking for help. And he says, I don't know what to do. And I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what. Last time I gave him not such great advice, actually. I took him to the wrong passage. It really didn't apply to him very well. And I said, I'm going to pray on this one. Okay, I don't have the answer because I'm not really equipped to deal with this type of spiritual warfare. And so I said, I've just got to pray about it. And man, did God ever answer that prayer. I saw him the next day in a situation where I normally would never see him. And I said, I've been praying for you. And I said, I've got answers to what you asked me. He said, okay. I said, how much of the Bible are you familiar with? He said, I've just read Genesis. And I said, okay, well, I'll tell you, this comes out of the New Testament, and it's about Judas. And he said, well, I know who that is. I said, okay, well, Judas one day was standing there, a prostitute came up. She'd spent her money on some expensive perfume, rubbed it on her hair, and rubbed it onto Jesus' feet to worship him. And Judas said something that sounded very moral and good. He said that money could have been used to help the poor. Well, that's a nice moral thing to do, isn't it? And in the narration, it says he was in charge of the purse and was a thief and was trying to fill the coffers more so he could steal more. And Jesus rebuked him. And I said, how would a stranger, if one were a pedophile, let's say, wanted to attract a child, how would they do it? And he goes, give them something they want. I said, give them something they want. Make them feel good. I said, you want to do good things, don't you? You want to be a good moral person. I said, Judas's argument sounded enticing. It sounded good. I said, I think something similar is going on here with these spirits that are contacting you. I think they're demonic in their ultimate source. And I think they're heading down a path. Now, this is the part where heading you down a path. I said, this is the part that's crazy. And I prayed about it seconds, but when I saw him, I said, Lord, I'm going to tell him what you showed me. And I pray that that this helps him and blesses him, because this has never happened to me. But I had a dream hours before I saw him, just hours before I saw him. And I said, I have a dream, and I want to tell you what happened in the dream. I said, there was a tree. I said, the dream even has a name. It's called the murder tree. And I said, a tree was growing and was beautiful. And it was growing like it ought to grow. It was a lush, vivacious tree. It was beautiful. In the dream, I mean, it was like blue and white. It was just this beautiful tree. It wasn't a fake Christmas tree, all right? It was a real tree. It was just, unearthly beautiful. And someone evil, I even remember seeing a hand come to the base of the tree and plant seeds. Someone evil came and planted seeds at the base of the tree, and it grew up a tree that was never meant to really grow to be anything. It was only meant to do one thing. It was meant to take the water from the beautiful tree and cause it to die. So the roots got into the roots of the beautiful tree, soaked all the roots out, all the water out, rather. Neither one wasn't supposed to live anyway, and the other one now couldn't and was destroyed, withered and died. And I said, I'm going to offer an idea of what I think this is. And he was very curious, and I said, I think that it's demonic possession, and I think it's a warning to you. And he had to go. I mean, like right after that. And I pray to God that if I messed this up, if I got it wrong, to forgive me. I hope that was my interpretation of the dream. I have to be totally honest. I think God is very clear when he gives visions, although he also sometimes leaves things lingering for you to try to figure out. But pray for this guy, because I want him to come to know Jesus. I want him to be saved. I think he wants to do good things, but if you want to do good things, you ought to want to do the ultimate good, just like Cornelius in our story. He ought to do, that we're going to read here next. He ought to have wanted to do the really, really good things that is ultimately found in the person of Jesus Christ. We're seeing a pattern now develop. Saul gets a vision separate from the apostles, but it's a vision from God, and it's the same gospel that they know. Cornelius gets a vision separate from Peter's vision. Now, this guy I was talking to gets visions and dreams. I have a separate vision and dream, and I bring it to him, and I believe God's potentially communicating with this guy. It's not that I doubt God's communicating with him. I just want to make sure that I'm clear that I don't know all the details. I just know what I told him and that what my personal interpretations were. But this passage came up, and then I heard a sermon right after I told him that story about how Paul in Acts 17 is in Athens, and they have a statue to the unknown God. They're hedging their bets. And he says, I come on behalf of that God. And God does use things to communicate to people. And so this guy apparently likes to hear dreams and visions. He trusts that. And so I think God is communicating with him through that. And we see this pattern in the Bible, God using visions and dreams, and they'll get coordinating information in separate places. And that's why I started this with trying to get you to understand that this is a spiritual reality that we are ultimately dealing with. It's not all spelled out in the Bible entirely, okay? But there's a lot to take in. So, Acts 10, starting in verse 1, take all this in. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now send men to Joppa and bring one Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among those who attended him. And having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. So this man was probably known as a God-fearer. Maybe he might have been a convert. Sometimes Romans, or they did participate in Jewish practices, and some of them did convert and become God-fearers. I think this guy is something along those lines. And he's active in government. And if as a centurion in charge of, 100 men. And being active in government, God, that's not such a great thing, okay? The people in government just weren't trusted, and for good reason. This is why tax collectors are so hated, right? If you don't know the story, they collect taxes, but they also collect a little extra for themselves, as I understand it. And this fostered great hate in them. A friend of mine told me a story where he was on a missionary journey with another friend, and someone had sent a bicycle and to him through the mail. In order to get it, they had to keep bribing people to work their way up the chain, bribing people. And they got to the last person in the chain, and he just didn't have any more money. And they just kind of give him the runaround. The bike was probably long gone. And they said, well, he said, sorry, we're done. This was their last effort. And he said, as they were leaving, the guy kept tugging at his pocket and saying, where's my bribe? Where's my bribe? Where's my bribe? So there's good reason here, beyond what just comes out off the page to us, why there could be baggage. I'm taking a guess, an educated guess here, but I think that him working for the government could be something that would hold Peter back, and could give you an idea of reinforcing some of Peter's prejudices against those who were not of Israel or not of Jewish heritage. This man was Cornelius, actively trying to please God. He feared God. He wanted to please him. My own personal search, I remember really earnestly desiring to find God. I wanted there to be a God. I was so afraid of dying that I just desperately wanted there to be a God. But the problem with that is, unlike what the skeptics will tell you, the skeptics tell you we believe because we're afraid of dying. No, I disbelieved because I was afraid of dying. No, is that counterintuitive? Absolutely not. It's too important of a question to make up a God. You see? There had to be a real God. That's the only way I could explain the possibility of life after death. Now, God ultimately answered that question, and that answer came not the way I thought it would. I thought it would come through the intellect. It wasn't. The answer came through morality. Here's a man doing good moral things, and God's listening, and God is watching. And you may think that your good works have no spiritual significance at all, but they actually do. If we are foundationally, ultimately spiritual beings, that should play out in our members. And what I mean by that, it should play out in the way we live our lives. And I've been very convicted reading this passage, thinking about what alms have I offered. And I think that if you should also take that in. And I want more opportunities to do that and to be more giving. And God is listening. He's there. And those are spiritual acts. And if you believe that this is a spiritual world, then you believe that these alms that you are giving are rising before God, and He is there. Remember, and I've said this a lot, and I've been challenged with this too recently, that we don't want to be sensual. That is to say, we don't want to interpret everything by the senses because that's just physical. And the reason why I say I've been challenged with that is I've been challenged that maybe I've done a little bit of that in my life and didn't even realize it. And so we have to really, even though in this culture it's hard to see sometimes, we have to understand that our prayers and our acts of kindness to others so that they'll see Jesus are really being treasured up by God. And we see that with Cornelius, who I believe isn't even a disciple yet. He's on his way, though. The next section starts in verse 9. I'm going to read this quickly. The next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour to pray. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens open and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its 4 corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." And the voice came to him again, a second time, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times, and the thing was taken up at once to heaven. Now, 3 times, I'm assuming that means it's emphatic repetition of something was repeated and meant that with great emphasis. So I'm assuming that's what this is here, that this vision, Peter was to really take it in and understand it. Now I want to talk about an interpretive issue that comes up here. So it's being let down by its 4 corners, and then the scriptures will talk about the 4 corners of the earth, and then covers the earth. Now I'm going to talk more about this next week, but people will say, well, see, this shows that the Bible just assumes the earth is flat. As someone who's spent a lot of time interpreting the Bible and trying my best not to arrive at assumptions about authorial intent based on things that authors don't expressly reveal about their intentions, I would think that someone should be very cautious about coming to that conclusion. I didn't have a chance to study that yet, and there's just too much to talk about to even bring it up. So next week, I promise I will do a little bit of study into that. And I haven't done some studies, but it's been a long time. But suffice it to say, I was pretty convinced of what I saw, that that's not what's happening here. But let's talk about what the author's actual intentions are. What does it do? It covers the earth. Doesn't matter the shape of the sheet here, okay? The point here is that it's covering the earth, okay? With what? Both clean and unclean animals of different regions, I suppose, and different types, and covering the whole earth. Now, Peter, having a Jewish history, well, this is a very foreign idea. He doesn't eat animals that are unclean. And he's given this over to God. He has given it to him. This is something, you see this in the Old Testament where God blesses those who obey his food laws. And Peter's been taught and seen that this is something. Imagine having a religious belief that you hold so sacred and maybe really sacrificed for your whole life, and coming to find that things aren't the way you thought they were. I've got several of those. I have some I'm still struggling with. Okay? No, that's not a bad thing, actually. I think we should struggle with those things because it may take time to mature and come over them, to get over them. But this was a tough one for Peter. But he was going to have to get over it fast. I've told the story, so I'm going to keep it short. I remember going back to the Catholic Church, wonderful Catholics that I knew and friends, and I felt God wanted me to go another direction. And I was leaving my garage and getting ready to go into the house, and I stopped and I looked in the sky and I said, God, you have to give me time on this one. I just couldn't imagine trying another denomination. But we had to sometimes, there can't be things so sacred, they're too sacred to sacrifice to God. Okay? And so Peter was given an emphatic command here in a vision. And so he was to turn his back on this incredibly important teaching that gets consumed inside of his very being. And why do I say that? Well, I say that like especially within Judaism, there are many Jews who are atheists, probably due mainly to the Holocaust, that are atheists, but they still practice Judaism. Now you may find that strange. I don't. I think these traditions are just woven into their very essence. I've brought that story up a lot, so I'm going to leave it at that. But if you haven't heard that before, it's true. And so Peter's supposed to turn on some of this, and he has to. It's so important. In some ways here in Acts, God has intervened to bless the church, to protect it. In other ways, God has intervened to bless his church to grow it. This is a case in where it's so important that Peter accomplished this. And so God is intervening in this case to ensure the growth of the church at a delicate time. And that's what's going to happen here. We're going to see something pretty incredible. So coming down into verse 17, actually that was, verse 17. Now, while Peter was inwardly perplexed as to what the vision that he had seen might mean, behold, the men who were sent by Cornelius, having made inquiry for Simon's house, stood at the gate, and called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was lodging there. And while Peter was pondering the vision, the Spirit said to him, Behold, 3 men are looking for you. Rise and go down and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them. And Peter went down, I kind of lost my place there. And Peter went down to the men and said, I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason for your coming? And they said, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright and God-fearing man, who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by a holy angel and to send for you to come to his house and to hear what you have to say. So he invited them in to be his guests. That's down to 23a. As a side here, remember what we learned that in the Old Testament, that being a good host was a matter of survival. If someone couldn't rely on others to be good hosts at this time in the ancient world, you couldn't survive. So there was kind of this social contract a little bit that you would be a host for someone that was in need, and any traveler was in need. And so Peter is doing his duty here by being a good host. So I don't think that's an unimportant aspect of this. Sometimes you read the details and think the details aren't important and we pass over them, but it's to show that Peter's doing his part as a contributor to the well-being of others. Now, if someone came to you and said there's a vision, and they had seen an angel and all this, out of context, of course, would you think they're crazy? I think my initial my initial idea would be that they may be crazy, Now, in this case, Peter had already had a vision, so he was, expecting something. But it's very important that we not forget that sticking with our theme here, that with this being a spiritual reality, then we should expect that spiritual things should happen from time to time. And so we need to be open to that. And there isn't anything that happens that isn't outside of God's purview. So we just ask God to guide us, okay? And to be ready for that. Now, I love this part of the passage that says Peter was perplexed. Because while the vision was clear in one sense, in another sense, he wasn't quite sure. Peter is intellectually curious. He wants to know what God is trying to tell him. There is nothing in Peter's religious life as a Jew more important than that. There's nothing more important in your life or my life than that. Intellectual curiosity. Someone who really wants to find out the truth. And there are really 2 types of people here. There's some people that want to arrive at what is true, and they're not necessarily going to reject it just because it's not the news they want to hear. And there's those who they want to arrive at the truth as long as it kind of meets where they want it to end. And I'd say that latter person the Bible would call foolish, and the former person the Bible would call wise. Peter is contemplating this. He knows he doesn't know the answer to the ultimate meaning of this. Cornelius doesn't know where this is ending either, right? So there's this desire to meet God where he is. And, I don't know that we can really give that to someone, right? I don't think that we can. But the fact that he was perplexed, this idea that he was baffled and contemplating it, is really important, especially as someone who wants to teach. I want to teach people who want to learn. And this, again, keep it brief because I mentioned it a lot, but it's good to repeat every once in a while. The Bible is a puzzle. It's meant to be a puzzle. The wisdom writings tell us about the nature of the riddles of teaching. And so God is teaching. The teaching that we started this, remember in Acts 1, of importance of teaching. God's teaching here, okay? And he's teaching Peter something, but he's teaching in a way that one would probably not have expected. Now, the second half of verse 23, as we kind of close here, because I'm running out of time. The next day he rose and went away with them, and some of the brothers from Joppa accompanied him. And on the following day, they entered Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. When Peter entered, Cornelius met him and fell down at his feet and worshipped him. But Peter lifted him up, saying, "Stand up. I too am a man." And as he talked with him, he went in and found many persons gathered. And he said to them, "You yourselves know how awful it is for a Jew to associate with or to visit anyone or of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. I asked then why you sent for me." Since the peoples of the earth, the peoples of the world, the peoples of the nations don't all, Gentiles in particular, don't think that there are animals that are unclean, Peter now has to step outside of Judaism and not only not see the animals. This was not about the animals being unclean. This was about, now it was no longer time to separate from the Gentile world, but now it was time to show that God now was going to cleanse them. And in order to do that, Peter was going to have to accept now and reject something very important in Judaism. Something, again, deep in his bones, deep in his personhood. He was going to have to now change for the fostering of the church in these early stages. And so that is what he did. He now understood. He was no longer perplexed by the vision God had given him. He understands it now. The sheet covers the earth because the vision is for all the peoples of the earth. He is supposed to go to all of them, even if it's a sphere. But anyway, so that's all important that you understand that. So all the nations would be cleansed. Without the vision, Peter would probably likely not have done this. And so we ask, why did God try to teach Peter through a vision? Why did Jesus use parables? And it gets back again to that old methodology of, in the Bible again, repeating, but that old methodology of the prophets to show and tell, to tell the prophecy, to tell the teaching, but to show the teaching. Peter needed to be shown. He needed to see it. He needed to think about it. He needed to invest in the vision and to invest in what God was doing. That vision is very striking. You don't get that out of your head. Your imagination has to run wild when you see it, but he actually saw it. And so for him, he sees it clearly now. He did something miraculous. He went to a government agent, a centurion, someone who was not Jewish, and entered their home for the sake of the gospel. This is sort of like landing on the moon a little bit when you think about it. I mean, he's doing something that's just nowhere near within his character. God is asking him to step way, way, way outside of his comfort zone. Way outside of his comfort zone. When I talk to my friend at work, I don't have visions and dreams and a lot of supernatural things that happen to me. It's not that I don't believe in those things. But I had to admit that it was a lot of things going on. At some point, it stops being a coincidence and just start understanding it supernaturally. And I had to step outside of my comfort zone and tell him what had happened. It wasn't the most uncomforting thing because I knew that he spoke in these terms and understood these terms. But I think you get where I'm going with this. What is holding you back from your missionary journey? I know there are things that hold me back from time to time. I'm going to end with this final story. Senior Rostel. Senior Rostel was a teacher, Spanish teacher in high school. I loved the man dearly. I thought he was great. And I had been graduated. I was a new Christian, had been a Christian for a very short period of time. And I was at Kroger one day and I saw Senior Rostel. Senior Rostel taught my father, so I thought it was kind of interesting. And he had this very worried look. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I've been diagnosed with cancer. This is my 4th time." And he said, "But this time, I'm not sure I can beat it." And I knew he didn't live, I didn't know exactly where he lived, but he didn't live too far away. And it crossed my mind a few times to go visit him. And after he passed away, to maybe visit his wife. And I just didn't do it. I didn't do it. I don't know why. I guess because it was outside of my comfort zone. Maybe. It did seem like a strange thing to do. I mean, an ex-student coming by, and I see his face of how worried he is from time to time when I think about this, and it bothers me. I'm not trying to put you on a guilt trip or make you feel bad. That's not my goal here. I just feel like if God is calling us to something, we have to be willing to go. And whatever it is God's calling you, you got to go. What Peter did here is so radical. There's no way, if you're a believer, God's not calling you to the same radical behavior. He called me. This was an instance where I failed. And can't take it back, but I can learn from it. And you've probably failed in areas too. Okay. But you're a believer, and you know that God's behind you 100%, and God's ultimately the one doing the work. He did the work right here with Peter, and he's going to do the work with you, and he's going to do the work with me. And as the church, that's our job. As I've said, we're called to go on an adventure. Wherever God sends you, go there. Be blessed and have a wonderful week.